going to go ahead and start recording. So this particular presentation will be available. So if you're interested, you can email me and I can give you the link on where to get that. So today we have our Chickens 101. I've been kind of plugging this because I get a lot of calls from interested folks who really would love to have backyard chickens or who just want more information about chickens. So I am happy to say that we were able to get Dr. Casey Ritz from Poultry Science over at UGA to be our special guest tonight. And he's going to tell us all sorts of good stuff about chickens. So I'll just give you a little bit about him. He's a native of Oregon, and he's been an extension poultry specialist for the past 14 years. He specializes in broiler management, environmental and waste management, and focuses on the development of educational and research programs with emphasis on poultry production management, environmental issues with waste management. I know if anybody ever goes up near Hall County, we all know about all the chicken houses up there. So he's going to give us a bunch of very useful information, stuff that everybody probably has really just been dying to know. His presentation will be somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 45 minutes to 50 minutes with Zoom. And then there'll be a Q&A session afterwards. So because we have and can have up to about 70 participants, they'll probably keep trickling in here. I'm going to go ahead and say that I've muted everybody. So I will go ahead and as new people come in, I will mute them. But if you have a question that pops into your head as he's talking, feel free to go ahead in the chat box and type that in there. And then at the end of the presentation, when he's done, I will go into the chat box and I'll read off the questions that I see there, and they'll get answered as we kind of go on. So with further ado, I will go ahead and pass the ball to you, Dr. Ritz.
Well, thank you. I see. The first thing I noticed was I need to update my bio that you have. I've been at it for 28 years now.
28 years. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, you got to go update that.
Yeah, need to work on that. That's okay. Well, it's a great opportunity I appreciate the opportunity to, I'm just trying to get my screen here. To visit with everybody tonight and to talk about some of the things that that I find interesting about chickens and that hopefully will be of interest to you and help you as you make decisions, either if you already have chickens or if you are thinking about chickens or some of those questions that people always have. Hopefully some of the information we can pass along tonight will be of benefit to you. So I always like to start with this picture. And the only reason I do is because sorry about that. That fellow there, I don't know who he is, but he looks kind of like my dad. And so I grew up on a small farm in Oregon and we didn't have chickens that big, but it's always interesting to talk with folks about chickens, because what we've always found is that, when we go through downturns in the economy, for example, recession we had in 2008 and kind of rough times you're going through now, every time we see a kind of a jump in the price of goods and services, we always see an increased interest in homegrown foods, which is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There are some conditions about that, though, and I'll want to kind of point one out as we get to it a little bit later on when it comes to buying eggs versus raising our own eggs. Just a quick little thing here on the types of poultry systems. If we went and looked at the ancestor of the chicken that's still alive in Southeast Asia, we'd consider them a scavenger because they're a wild bird. And then on the other end of the scale, we have our commercial industry, and in between, and they each have their own components to them, but in between there really is kind of where our small flocks are. Yes, they can forage and get food and all those kinds of things, but we also need to be providing for some of their needs as well, and particularly when it comes to nutrition. So we'll also brush on that in just a minute. But what we've seen over the last couple of decades really is an consumer increase in different types of products, and they're reflected in our poultry products that we can buy. Environmentally friendly products, or people thinking that they want their chickens to be fed all vegetable diets. We'll have a quiz about that in a minute. Organically raised, or taking animal well-being into consideration. And then local sourcing, a lot of interest in buying foods that have been grown locally. And so that's an increasing point that we're seeing. But the result has been we're seeing a lot of premium priced products. Now, this is above and beyond. Haven't changed this slide because of the price of eggs right now, but this was the price of this particular product that, about a year and a half ago, before the avian flu problem we have. But these were the wording on the carton, and it says that they were USDA organic, pasture raised, certified humane, 1/3 less cholesterol, ethical eggs from happy hens raised on native grasses. So they hit a lot of the, these kind of consumer talking points on their carton. And the question I have for you is, how much do you think these were selling for, let's say 2 years ago, before the spike in eggs? Well, if you guessed somewhere along the line of $8.69 a dozen, that's what they were back then. And for many of us, that is way beyond what I'm willing to pay for eggs, knowing what I know about eggs. And so, but it's an interesting kind of phenomenon that we have. But as a result of all the changes in our economy, we're seeing an increase in these specialty products, but it's still a very small part of the market share, meaning that most Americans still want their food to be economically priced and available to them at the cheaper price. So what I have put together, and I've given this component of my talk a number of times for a number of years because it's interesting. I have what I call the urban myths and legends about homegrown poultry products. And so we'll cover some of these points right here. And I do this not to discourage anyone from ever having their own backyard birds. I don't want to do that at all. I just want to kind of dispel some of the misinterpretations and incorrect information that is out there about poultry products in general. So let's talk about reduced cholesterol. Remember from that egg carton, it said they had 1/3 less cholesterol. Well, we really can't reduce cholesterol. If it's a chicken egg, it's an egg. And an egg is an egg is an egg, meaning that if it's a chicken egg, there's nothing we can do to change that profile, that nutrient profile of that egg in any significant way. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a chicken egg. The chicken wouldn't be able to hatch that egg and produce the next generations of chickens. And so what I've listed here on the right is the standard nutritional facts for one large egg: 70 calories, 5 grams of fat, 180 milligrams of cholesterol, and then let's go down 6 grams of protein. So if we take that and think of that as an egg, what can we do then to change that cholesterol? Let's say we're going to get pastured birds, or vegetarian fed, or cage free. Can we reduce our cholesterol in those eggs in that way? But if you look at these nutrient profiles right off the packages, what do you see? You see 70 calories, you see 5 grams of fat, you see 6 grams of protein, and you see 185 to 190 milligrams of cholesterol. What about if we go organic, free range, and then we'll pull in our heritage breeds? None of those breeds that have been manipulated in any way. What kind of nutrient profile are we going to get from these eggs? Well, what would you know? 70 calories, 5 grams of fat, 6 grams of protein, and 185 milligrams of cholesterol. If it's a chicken egg, it's going to have 185 milligrams of cholesterol if it's a large egg. Now, some years ago, there was a company that tried to sell reduced cholesterol eggs. They're no longer in business because it was a gimmick. What they were doing is they were taking those first small eggs that hens lay when they first go into lay, and they were selling those as reduced cholesterol eggs. Well, the only way it was reduced cholesterol was in the amount in the egg. Because they were small eggs, there was less cholesterol, but the proportion was still the same when it came to the actual egg. And so it was a marketing gimmick to do that. So it doesn't matter what language you say it in, a chicken egg is going to have 70 calories, 5 grams of fat, 6 grams of protein, about 185 milligrams of cholesterol. That's an egg. All right, here's another one. If I produce my own meat and eggs in the backyard, they're going to be healthier and safer for me. Well, what we found really is that, and part of it's a lack of information, a lack of resources, sometimes a lack of medical resources, often a inadequate nutrition. But what we typically find is that bacteria and viruses, when it comes to the health of our chickens and therefore the health of our products, is that it's more prevalent in a small flock for those reasons that I mentioned. So oftentimes, like we say, nutrition is the big problem. We'll cover that in just a minute. And I'll tell you, and I'll explain what that picture is at the bottom in just a minute or two. Here's another one. If I produce my own protein products, they'll be hormone free. Now, this is a myth. I don't know why we can't get rid of it, but genetics and not hormones have made the modern bird. Genetic selection. Hormones have never been added to commercial poultry or poultry in general. They're prohibited. They wouldn't work. They'd be too expensive. And it's been selection, genetic selection, that's got us, to our modern bird. In this picture here, this is, I'm showing you these are carcasses from 1957 genetics. This is a line of birds that we keep at our research farm. And then the bird on the right is a 2012 meat broiler. Those birds were fed the same amount of feed for the same amount of time. They're the same age. And the only difference between them is the amount of genetic selection has occurred within the flocks, those flocks where they came from. Now, people, often don't have any trouble understanding, for example, these two dogs. You have a Great Dane and you have a Chihuahua. We know that they have a common ancestor. And it was through genetic selection that we have the different varieties of dogs that we have out there. Well, it's the same with chickens. Hormones were not added to create that Great Dane, just as no hormones were added to create that broiler meat that we have. Okay, another one's fresher. Well, certainly, if you're picking up eggs every day and consuming them within a few days, then that's about as fresh as you can get. But we do eat a lot of eggs in the United States, about 189 eggs per person, in all the different products that we buy. And so we our industry, we do go through a lot of eggs because of the consumption that we have. If you are interested in knowing how old an egg is, when you buy it at the store, they have what is called the Julian date. And on the carton, they'll have a sell-by date, which is in a lot of ways is just an inventory. They just want to rotate inventory. They have some plant numbers, and then these first 3 numbers here on the left, that's the Julian date. And that's the day of the year that those eggs are put into the carton. So in this case, it says 024. So it's on the 24th day of the year. So January 24th, they went into the carton. So if you buy them and and you buy them on the 27th, and they've only been in the grocery store for about 3 days. And so that's one way you can tell freshness in those commercial eggs that you might get. What about better flavor? I hear this a lot, from the, small flock birds. The eggs have a deeper, more egg flavor, kind of almost hints of barnyard. And that's very true because, flavor and color are fat soluble molecules, and they're feed dependent. So what the birds eat contributes to the color and flavor of that yolk. The example here is yolk on the left, I think, is a sorghum. The next one is a traditional corn soy diet, and then the two on the right are more small flock, pasture raised kind of birds, where they can get some color molecules from the greens that they might eat, and so that enhances then that color of the yolk. When it comes to flavor, that can become an issue too. For example, fish meal is a really good protein source for chickens. They can absorb it, they can utilize it very readily. But if we feed fish meal more than 8-10%, then the yolks will start tasting like fish, have a fishy flavor to them, and nobody wants that. So the things that your birds eat, whether it be beetles or grubs or mice or whatever they can put down their throat, because that's what they're going to do, those fat soluble molecules, flavor and color molecules, are going to come into that yolk, and so that's going to contribute to the flavor of the yolk. Now, some companies, for example, a lot of the consumers in South America really like those really deep orange, almost red colored yolks, and so companies down there will actually feed things such as marigold petal flour. They'll put it into the corn or into the feed that they give them, and that deepens that color in the yolks. Doesn't change the nutrient profile or anything at all, but it changes that color because those are fat soluble molecules there. So here's the internet quiz I found. And I'll give you the real answer, not the answer they said. So they said, pick the egg yolk you think came from a healthy chicken. Well, the answer is, of course, they said that number one is the healthy chicken. The other two are unhealthy. Well, they're all healthy. Again, it's all in what they ate from a color molecule standpoint. That's all it is. And it has nothing to do with the nutritional value or the healthiness of that egg or the healthiness of the hen. It's just the color molecules in the feed. Well, here's one I want you to think about now too. Prices are going up. Egg prices are out through the roof for some reason, when we'll talk about that, but cheaper. If I raise my own chickens now, I'm going to get some chickens, raise my own eggs, have my own eggs, that I can save some money. Well, maybe over the long run, but I try to be very conservative in this kind of guesstimate of what it would cost that first year. So if we bought, let's say, 3 chickens, and they were $3 a piece, and we spent no more than $500 on a coop and feeders and drinkers and everything else, and we had some feed and some miscellaneous costs, then I came up with about $560 a year for that first year for your three hen flock. Now, if you ate a dozen eggs every week and they laid a dozen eggs every week for every week of the year, then those eggs would be, your price would then be $10.77 per dozen. Now, go back to those $8.69 dozen eggs that we would never buy, but now we just did by some of the costs that we incurred when we put in our small flock of chickens. So need to be careful when you think about that. There are some costs that we often don't think about when it comes to having our own small flock. I gave this presentation in Forsyth County a few years back, some modifications, and had a fellow in the back raise his hand. He was laughing. He said, I think I'm up to $40 a dozen with all the, he said, with all the fancy doodads his wife was having him put around the coop. But you can go overboard in a hurry when it comes to expenses that you might incur with having a small flock like that. So differences in eggshell color, because really what we have is brown eggs and white eggs. Of course, there's some others, but these are the main ones. So we've determined that the same nutritional profile, they have the same grading system. They just have historically regional preferences. I grew up on the West Coast. I didn't see a brown egg until I moved back east, essentially, and where brown eggs are more have a stronger historical preference here along the Atlantic seaboard. Brown egg shells are a little thicker. They come from a bigger bird. Bigger birds lay fewer eggs, and because they're bigger, they take more feed, and because there's more feed, fewer eggs, then the price of brown eggs is going to be more expensive than traditional white egg. And so really that's the only difference based on shell color with our eggs. And some people just like to have a menagerie of colors in their backyard, and that's great. I mean, there's a lot of unique breeds that we can get that produces different egg colors and eggshell color, and that's something you can always do. So here's another quiz. We have two chickens here. How do we know which one is going to lay brown eggs and which one is going to lay white eggs? So think about that for a second, this quiz. Is there any way we can tell the difference? Well, it's a trick quiz, right? These are roosters, so neither one of them are going to lay eggs. But if they were hens, the bird on the left, we call this the earlobe, even though it really isn't. A red earlobe, they're going to lay brown eggs. A white earlobe, they will be laying white eggs. So when you're thinking about having a small flock, some things to think about. Do you want just family needs? You just want some, produce eggs and meat maybe for the family, or do you want to have some volumes that you can sell something to the farmer's market or your neighbors? Do you want to try and hit some of those highest price specialty products? You want to raise some of those types of things? Or in some areas, people are doing subscription farming, where they're actually taking order forms and deposits, and they're raising birds and things like that for other people who might be living in town. So lots of different kind of options there. One thing to take into consideration is any ordinances or restrictions that may be either in the county that you live in or in the municipality if you live inside of city limits. And that often is what we've seen in Georgia is most counties don't have any restrictions outside the county, but it's when you get into town where some of the municipalities have different ideas on what they want to allow for chickens, and some don't allow any at all. The four main concerns that everyone always has is that they think that the backyard chickens will smell, they'll be noisy, they'll bring in pests, and then they'll reduce a neighbor's property value. So let's cover these really quick. Concerns over noise, easy, rooster ban. We don't need roosters for our hens to lay eggs every day. We only need a rooster if we want, fertilized eggs, or if we want to hatch the eggs. But so rooster ban, easy way to stop noise problems. Smell, typically they'll do like a bird limit or have some sanitary guidelines. Some municipalities have a very strict limit. You can only have 6 or 8 birds, period, or others will have a per acre limit that might be there. It all just depends. There's no standard trend across counties or municipal ordinances here in the state. Concerns over pests, we can, have any containers that are covered. Almost simple as that. As long as they can't burrow into it. And these galvanized metal garbage cans are great for feed, and easy way to prevent any kind of pest populations. And then concerns over property values. I call it what I call is unfounded realism. There might be a little bit of both in there, but in the end, as long as the chickens are taken well care of and they're kept in the place where they belong, there's not going to be any problem with a neighbor having backyard chickens if they're doing everything they need to be doing, and that's following the guidelines that they give. So let's cover some need to know management basics. And a lot of these have to do with when the birds are young, because that's when they're most vulnerable to mistakes that we might make in taking care of them, or and so let's just kind of go down through these quickly here. Heat. Young birds can't self-regulate their body temperatures fully when they're hatched, and so we need to start them off at about 90 to 95 degrees, or an area where they can get that heat. I show examples of a couple of kind of homemade little brooders that are down here. My preference is the one on the right, showing that you have a heat lamp, you have water, you have drinkers, but you have space for, if the birds are cool, they can get under the heater, but if they're warm, they can get away from it. And then this is just a cardboard ring, and it's be a draft shield. So cold air coming from somewhere, a window or door, or underneath a garage door or something like that's not going to be hitting those chicks and chilling them. And then we're going to step that temperature down about 5 degrees every week as they start to mature and get feathers and that kind of thing there. Light's important, particularly if you want laying hens. Once those hens are lit and are ready to start laying, we need to make sure they have 14 hours of light a day, every day, unless you want them to follow a natural molting, go out of lay cycle. As long as we keep that 14 hours of light a day, they're going to lay eggs even through the winter months. And so that's important when it comes to egg laying. Space, preferred to be confined. That protects them from disease and predators and things like that, the weather, the elements. But it kind of depends on what you want to do and what your plans are and what might be allowed in the area you're at. Next thing is bedding. Pine shavings or pine sawdust is the best. Paper is the worst. You don't want newspaper. I had in another presentation, I used to show a picture of newspaper, but newspaper is too slick. And young chicks, when they're young, it's pretty easy for them to essentially dislocate a hip, and when that happens, they're essentially done. There's really no going back. Yes, I know there's some internet fixes for it, putting a rubber band around them or hobbling them in some way, and that might be able to work if you catch it quickly and if there hasn't been severe damage, but that's not the norm. And so making sure that they have a proper bedding, pine being the best, is important. As they begin to get older, adequate space, 2.5 square feet per bird is great. And that's plenty when it comes to a laying hen and in their cooped environment. We talked about light, ventilation. It's going to be kind of natural if you have a small flock, but this is the example down here of they have the light on at night, and that's because it's on a timer, but they're making sure they have those 14 hours of light a day, and during the fall and winter months when it gets dark early, if they have that light on, then they'll continue to lay those eggs. This picture here is actually out of sequence, and I'm not sure why I put it here, but this is showing a predator guard around this one, and I'll show you another picture of that in a little bit. So one of the questions we need to ask is, what are we going to, are they going to be in a coop or on the ground? Are we going to confine them? What are we going to do? And there's 1,001 options out there. You can buy expensive plastic ones like this one up here, or you can make them out of stuff that you might have around your property, or you can buy kits. I made this one here out of an old pallet and piece of plywood, plastic things that you can buy, you can order. You know, some people have gone out, stained glass windows and river rock, and murals inside. I mean, you can do what you want. Just remember that price tag I talked about at the beginning. How much you're willing to spend on their shelter or the coop that you're going to have them in. So again, these are just some examples of some pastured type of scenarios. All kinds of different kits and examples and drawings, line drawings that you can get if you want to do that. Here's a mobile one up top on a farm. I like this one down here, a KFC. The joke was that if they didn't lay eggs, they knew where they were headed. So again, all kinds of options. Well, let's talk about nutrition here. Nutrition is really important. It's also the most expensive component. It's about 70% of the cost of raising eggs or raising meat. And so very important that we have a well-balanced, clean water so they produce at their optimum. Chickens really are like feeding a dinosaur in a lot of ways. They're omnivores, means they'll eat anything, and they're not vegetarians. They have a short digestive tract, and so that means they really can't benefit from grass or straw or anything they might eat. That they're not designed to derive nutrients from grass and things such as that. But they are foragers. They're a scavenger, really. That's how their ancestors were. But we've genetically selected them for higher growth rates. That's really what we've done, and we can do that because of the genetic component that's part of them. So it's kind of a joke, funny picture here, but it kind of is like feeding a dinosaur. But nutrient balance is really important, and having the right feed in the right proportions really is important when it comes to feeding our birds. This picture down here these are broiler birds, and they were hatched on the same day. So this bird here, exact same age, same flock as these three over here. This bird had a complete diet, had everything it needed for optimal growth that it wanted, free choice. They all had free choice what they were given. Just some of these birds were not given enough energy or not given enough protein. And so making sure that our diet is balanced is critical for optimal production, whether it be a meat bird or an egg layer. A lot of times people want to kind of mix their own feeds or give them scratch feed, which is a bad deal. I'll talk about it in a second. But a lot of times what happens is that they're deficient in minerals and vitamins, and oftentimes this is then what we see is a lot of these leg problems or neurological problems because they didn't have the right amount of nutrient in their diet. We can't overstate how important clean water is. A bird's going to consume twice as much water by weight as they will feed. And so good clean water is really important that they can utilize those nutrients that we're giving them. A lot of, you can make your own waters and you can make your own feeders. You can buy components to do that. These are traditional bell waters, and these are the nipple drinkers that I prefer. These bell waters, you can have clean water, but as soon as that first chicken takes a drink, whatever she has on her beak or leaves behind is already going to cause issues with the cleanliness of the water. Where these, they're triggering these stainless steel pins, and so they're getting clean water every time they trigger that, and they're not dipping their beak into the water source. So lots of options there that you can do. Two main problems we see: feeding the wrong feed or not feeding enough of the right feed. And scratch feed, as I mentioned, is not good chicken feed, not good balanced chicken feed. If you like feeding scratch feed, I want you to think of it as being dessert. If you like hand feeding your birds, do that. That's fine, but that should not be their only source of feed that you give them, because it's deficient in protein and minerals and vitamins. And then you'll see those abnormalities that will come to the forefront if they don't have enough of those nutrients. This is just to show you example of the protein that needs. So scratch feed is about 8 or 9% protein. Our broiler meat birds, they need to start out about 22%, and our layers need down here at least 16, 18% protein. So they need twice as much as that scratch feed could ever give them. So that's why, again, it's very important that we have a well-balanced diet. This is just showing you just how much feed a chicken will eat. 70 weeks, that one hen's going to eat about almost 130 pounds of feed in that 1 year, 70-week cycle. The white egg layers a little bit less. Our meat birds, they're going to eat almost 10 pounds in about 2 months or less. So they're really packing it on there. But it does take a lot of feed and expense to feed a chicken. Best methods for feeding the birds, of course, is going to be they're going to have it out of a clean feeder, and they're going to typically will have some kind of a free choice. They're not scrounging, although that's what chickens do. They like to scrounge and peck and forage, but when it comes to clean feed that we provide them, really is best to have it in a feeder. And there are a lot of options out there. A couple examples here. This is somebody made one out of PVC pipe, where they would dump it into the pipe outside the coop and it flows in, the chickens eat it. Well, only issue with this one is look how much they're wasting. And so you need to be mindful of the design of your feeder if you're going to make it. I like this one, kind of unique. It's called a treadle feeder, and they quickly learn how to use it. The chickens step onto this platform. The feeder opens up, this lid opens up, they eat all they want, and when they step off, then the lid closes. So it keeps wild birds and rodents and things like that out of it. Well, just a slide about good backyard birds. And if we have time, which is already quickly going away, the best breeds, when you look at overall temperament and egg production and meat utility, kind of dual purpose bird, these are the breeds that really kind of come to the top when it comes to backyard birds. We have English breeds and we have American breeds, and they're all brown egg layers. So we have the Rhode Islands, the Wyandottes, New Hampshires, and then the English, Sussex, Orpington, Australorp. But the Texans also are a good backyard bird. Well, I do need to take a few minutes. We need to talk about biosecurity and protecting the flock, because, as you know, it's been in the news, of course. We've got an avian flu problem, a highly pathogenic one, meaning that it kills birds very, very quickly. And it's essentially stems from waterfowl. Wild waterfowl are the reservoirs for this virus. They're not really affected by it, although this particular strain that we have right now, excuse me, it's causing some trouble. But it kind of follows those flyways. And so we're coming up on a migration route now. They're going to be flying south or north now again. And so we're going to have some, perhaps potential spread of avian flu now going back north as the wild birds go north again. Lots of information is available out there. These are the number of states, commercial flocks and backyard flocks that have been affected by this current outbreak that we have, this 2022-23. We've had to either depopulate or birds have died. Almost 60 million birds thus far have been destroyed because of this virus. 440 flocks, small flocks, and 316 commercial operations. A lot of operations in the Midwest have been hit really hard. And so, the backyard flocks, as I mentioned, it shows that Louisiana and West Virginia haven't had a positive case. I don't believe that in the least. I'm sure they have it there. It's just perhaps nobody's taken their birds to get them tested, or the federal labs have not tested them. But I'm 100% confident that there's avian flu in backyard birds in those states as well. We've actually had, I think, 2 flocks here in Georgia that have been identified as positive backyard flocks. If you're interested in following some of these statistics, you can go to this federal webpage. You can search avian flu USDA, and you can kind of track each state. We do have an avian flu information page on our webpage at UGA. If you search UGA avian flu, this will pop up. And there are resources there that we've made for you. There's a where am I looking at here? There's a question and answer. There's some other resources there. This is the question and answer, frequently asked questions. If you can peruse through that, and if you want to know a little bit more avian flu, there's also some other resources there that we use with our county agents that they can help you through. We call this our triage sheet, where people can call in and say, my birds are acting a little funny. These are some of the symptoms they have. And the idea is that we want to make sure that if avian flu gets into our state and spreads, we need to stop it as quickly as we can. So we need to identify any potential sources. We do have, because of the size of our industry in the state, we do have the Georgia Poultry Lab Network, and they do have an avian flu hotline. This is mainly for suspected cases. If we end up going through the lab, it's generally because there's a greater chance that the birds would have respiratory disease. We want to make sure it's not avian flu, and they do have veterinarians, a couple that could go to a small flock and do some testing. The Department of Ag also has an avian flu site that, again, the more information we can get out there, the more connectivity we can have, the better it is to make sure that our products are safe. And all of our Georgia broiler meat and eggs are always tested for avian flu prior to slaughter. And so it's not in our commercial flocks. And so properly cooking eggs and meat is always the best advice for anything, food safety wise. And so avian flu is not going to be going through our food supply, and it's really not a direct threat to human health. The strains that we've had here in the United States, and there's only been 2, they are not really transmissible to human population. So just a few biosecurity measures. What we're trying to do is isolate, have some traffic control, and sanitize. We don't want to bring germs to our birds, and we don't want to take our birds to germs. And so we try and isolate them from wild birds, particularly waterfowl. We want to make sure we're having good pest control, and we can do that again with how we take care of our feed. That's probably the number one way. And then quarantine any new birds we get or any sick birds. That's not always 100% foolproof, because a quarantine's not going to help you if a bird has already survived a virus and shedding the virus, and it will still shed the virus even after it comes out of a quarantine. And so it's not 100% sure. And then traffic control, avoiding who sees our birds and how we attend to them, all are going to be important. Dedicated clothes and footwear when we attend our birds. If you don't remember anything else to tell you tonight, the best thing for you to do would be, the one thing I want you to remember is that if you have chicken shoes, that's probably one of the best things you can do for your birds to help protect them. That there's only a pair of shoes that you use when you go to tend your birds. Well, maybe it's a pair of rubber boots and you clean them off and sanitize them, great. But make sure that that's the only place you wear those shoes. And if you have shoe covers, whatever it might be, that's a great thing. But that most diseases walk into our birds, and so that's very important that we do that. Sanitizing foot baths, I like them. They help keep us have a kind of a disease prevention mindset. You have to maintain them to make sure they're effective. Clorox is not going to work. Anything chlorine will not work in a foot bath. You need something like some kind of pine or ammonia-based product if you're going to do that. We mentioned pest control earlier a little bit, having those treadle feeders maybe, or just making sure that you're cleaning up around so that it's not harboring mice or rats around your chickens. That's important. So we want to minimize wild bird contact, minimize visitors, particularly during times like we have now. Clean and disinfect regularly, confinement preferred, so they're not coming in contact with wild birds particularly. And then cleaning up is very important. Marek's disease. This is another thing I want you to always remember too, that Marek's disease is everywhere. It's a worldwide natural bird disease, and very easy to prevent by a vaccine when the chicks are hatched. Not reversible. So if your birds start showing clinical signs, it's inflammation and tumors in the nervous system. They're going to get paralyzed. Once they have exhibiting signs, but there's nothing you can do. And because it is everywhere, you might get away a year or two without having it, but the likelihood that it can creep in is pretty easy to do. So, and again, the simplest way is just make sure they have a vaccination day one. And when you order birds from a mail order hatchery or something like that, you can select a vaccination for the birds. It'll cost you a little bit more, but I highly recommend that you do that. Foulpox is another viral disease, and it's slow spreading, so it's not really a killer of birds per se. Kind of makes them unthrifty, but it's spread by biting insects, particularly mosquitoes. And so making sure that standing water around your chicken coop, that you don't have any of that, will help to minimize that. So one way you can help to prevent viral diseases also is to make sure that you buy any chicks or eggs from a hatchery that is participating in the National Poultry Improvement Program. And that's where their breeding stock has some pretty set vaccination schedules and programs that they participate in to make sure that birds that go out and are part of the existing birds around the country, that they're all as disease-free as we can get. Okay, well, let's jump over this because we're running out of time already. If you're hatching your own chicks, you can buy Marek's vaccine. It only comes in really large doses, and that's because it's targeting the commercial industry that uses it as well. But it's relatively inexpensive. So even though you buy 1,000 doses and you only have 5 chickens, it's still worth the price to ensure that your chickens are safe. I'm just going to jump ahead because we're already almost at 55 minutes. Just a couple more things. Bacterial disease prevention, good management, sanitation is, not feeding your birds in a mucky mess. That's a good bacterial disease prevention to get them out of that mess as best you can, that they're not around in that. Other notable diseases really is Bumblefoot is a common problem in small flocks. It's a staph infection. Often happens from when there's damage or to the bottom of the foot, either a puncture of some kind or something like that. It can be hard to treat because it's a deep infection. And there's some internet advice on that. I guess you can do it yourself if you're willing to, do a little surgery kind of thing, but pretty common, as are some of these other worms and parasites that we show here, the roundworms and all the way to coccidia. Sometimes you can tell what's going on with your birds just by looking at their manure. The top two pictures are normal looking fecal and cecal manure, so a daytime manure and a nighttime manure. It's when these bottom pictures on the left is coccidia, seeing a little bit of blood in the manure. That's from a parasitic coccidia parasitic infection. Roundworms, when they get over infested, they'll start coming out in the manure as well. And the others are, intestinal infections or off feed, like the green on the right. That's kind of a bile looking manure where they're off feed. There really isn't much in there. Sometimes you can tell if something's going on, but not always easy to do. Now, we've had a lot of calls about parasites, both internal and external, worms and mites and lice and things like that. And I'll tell you that the best ones we can't use, of course. The ivermectin and the fenbendazole, they're off label for poultry. And so I can't really tell you anything about them. There are some products that you can find if you go to Tractor Supply or some other farm store. Piperazine, been used a lot. It may not even be available anymore. I need to double check that actually. But important though that you get them on some kind of a treatment program, and then always remember that you have to treat them more than once, because a lot of times the treatments kill the adults but not the eggs. And so you make sure that if you treat, like for example here, if you treat for mites, on 7 or 10 days later, you need to treat them again for those eggs that are hatching that now can be exposed to that parasite or to that pesticide. Permethrin is a common product that's been used for mites, even seven dust. There's a product called Elector. It's a different type of, it's a microbially derived insecticide that works really well. All these need to be in a rotation. Don't use them year after year after year. And again, you have to double treat to make sure you kill the larva. Dust baths, chickens naturally want to dust bathe. They do that to help control, that's their own way they control external parasites and clean their feathers. And so if you want to mix together wood ash, some sand, and diatomaceous earth, that's a pretty good dust bath for them to have. And also regular coop cleaning will help to reduce any chances of you having to deal with a large outbreak of external parasites. Environment control, other pest control, always going to be important. Predators, sometimes not so easy to do. That picture I showed you of the coop with the overhang there, that's because sometimes these predators, they want to dig underneath the wire. They think they can dig underneath. Well, if you have that wire angled, they'll dig into this corner and they can't figure out they got to back up here 8 inches or so and dig again. And so that's one way to control predators, but they can climb, believe it or not. Some of these you wouldn't think can climb over and get in there. And certainly hawks and even bald eagles in the state of Georgia can be a problem, depending on where you're at. I did see this one Instagram thing or Pinterest, I can't remember, but this particular place, they use these floppy American, they call them American Stanleys, I guess, floppy things that they have that blow air and they flop over, and use that as a scare away hawks and things like that. Well, let's see, pest control, cleaning up, mowing around, baiting down, all good things you can do to help keep pests away from your birds. And pests, right, mice and rats, things like that, they all can carry diseases that that poultry can contract. So purchase eggs and chicks from an MPIP source, a minimum vaccinate from Eric's, good, fresh, clean feed and water, clean their coops regularly, preferred confinement, particularly during times like we have now. Be careful when you mix age groups. Older birds can give younger birds viral diseases that can be deadly for them. Avoid mixing species sometimes, yes. Waterfowl, particularly with our other poultry, can be a little bit of a heightened challenge, making sure that your waterfowl are not mingling with wild birds. Be careful how you borrow equipment, and if you do, make sure it's disinfected well. And then I say introduce new birds with caution, isolate for at least 3 or 4 weeks, kind of a quarantine. But again, it's not 100% for sure that they won't be taking something into an existing flock if you have it. Foot baths we talked about. So, by anything that you do is not going to be 100% effective, really. I mean, you can't guesstimate, that infected wild duck is going to fly over and a dropping is going to go right into their water source. You can't, prevent that kind of thing. But no small step that you do is unimportant. Really, everything that we can do for disease prevention is going to be really is a good practice to do. And it doesn't have to be, biosecurity doesn't have to be painful or costly or to be effective. Sometimes just simple things like dedicated shoes and things like that, not sharing equipment, can be the difference between keeping our birds safe and healthy. Well, that's what I had. We could go a little longer if we want to talk a little bit more in depth about some breeds, but there is, I guess, another myth that is out there kind of right now, is that the government myth about chicken feed, and it's not true. It's a myth. Whatever you've heard, it's not true. The government's not withholding feed and ingredients that's causing our birds to not lay enough eggs. It's the avian flu. It's, remember, almost 60 million birds have been depopulated, and most of them have been laying hens. And so it takes a while if you have to get rid of a flock of 1 million birds, sometimes it takes a while to regenerate, to bring in new birds and for them to lay to capacity that meets the demand for eggs. And so it's the avian flu is causing havoc on our eggs and turkey market more so than anything else. And that's just because of the volume of birds that have been affected by this particular outbreak. Well, Lisa, let's stop it there and let's see what questions we have.
I know one of the other myths that is going around about the feed, I guess, is that the commercial feed, certain types of commercial feed brands are missing certain things, and that folks are creating their own feeds and giving that to their birds, and then suddenly they're starting to lay again. You want to address that maybe?
Yeah, that would be that's another myth. I mean, all of our feed mills have to meet USDA standards for performance for all of our livestock and all of our birds. And if somebody was actually doing that, they would be breaking USDA regulations. And so we don't have companies that are intentionally withdrawing or withholding appropriate nutrients. And so oftentimes it's just a matter of when in the life of that bird they get feed, or what was different? Was the lighting different, or was something else different? It's not a feed conspiracy out there.
Okay, thanks for addressing that. So there's a handful of questions here. And again, anybody, if you have a question and something pops into your head, I know I saw a few things pop up that said, we wish we had more time, which that's awesome. We always love questions. So if you have a question and you didn't see that information on the slides, or it got whizzed through to try to finish up, go ahead and put that in the chat box. I think I did see one where they asked if your slides would be available. This is going to be recorded. So if you're interested, I sent out a reminder email right before, I don't know, about an hour before this presentation, and it's got my email. So it just respond to that and I'll send you the link where you can watch this. Are you up for sharing like a 3-up or something like that of a PDF of your slides, or you want to just leave it as the recording, Dr. Ritz?
Well, I mean, I guess I could share a PDF, and if anybody is interested, they can go through you to get one. It's going to essentially be the slides that that are on the presentation, minus a few picture slides that didn't say anything, kind of thing. But yeah, we could do that.
Okay, cool. All right, so starting with the few questions that we have, are any breeds, sorry, I skipped one. So I think going back to the cost of this original, when you were talking about setup of the birds, the coop, everything else. So you said that, I don't remember the exact number, but eggs cost a certain amount. So this question is, so if you don't eat 1 dozen per week, does it get any cheaper? Sorry, not following the math.
No, they're still going to lay those eggs. So what are you going to do with them? I mean, the idea was that you were going to keep up with the hens. I was trying to maximize their potential, right? So that was like the maximum. So if they lay less eggs than that, then it's even more per dozen. So that's what I was trying to depict there. That if you ate every egg and they laid an egg every day, then that's what it would cost. But you're not going to eat that many eggs, and they're not going to produce that many eggs, so it'll be even more per dozen.
Okay. Are any breeds healthier than others that are also good egg producers? And just an anecdote, years ago, we used to raise Silkies and Polish top notches, and they were not great egg producers, but seemed to live a long time compared to others like Rhode Island Reds and Dominics.
Yeah. So some of those real traditional heritage, they're almost exhibition fowl, like the Polish and the Silky and those. They really aren't great egg layers. They're not. Their physiology is not that they're going to lay a whole bunch of eggs, and so they kind of fall more in line of almost the wild bird kind of pattern of, they lay a dozen eggs or so in the spring, and then they hatch chicks, and then they're done. So yeah, for sure, some of those more exotic types, they're not going to be nearly as productive for either eggs or meat or anything like that as the breeds or strains that have been essentially developed to produce more eggs or have more meat on them.
I guess if we were to equate them to plants, they'd be the ornamental chicken.
That's right. Ornamentals.
Okay, so next question, do they need grit or will they find it themselves?
Good question. They will find it themselves if they have access to that kind of thing. And if you have them confined in a coop, small coop, then I would say you need to feed them grit. If they're just running out in the yard, they'll probably find it. But if they're confined, certainly some grit would be appropriate.
Okay. Myth or truth, some breeds are noisier than others. This says for hens, not roosters. Do some bark more?
Yeah, I would say there's truth to that. and it all kind of depends on sometimes on the temperament of the bird. Now, for example, I'll compare like a white leghorn, which is it's a Mediterranean breed. They tend to be rather flighty. They're great egg layers, but they're small, flighty bird. And then you have like a New Hampshire or Rhode Island red, bigger, meatier bird. They tend to be much more even temperamented, have a more even temperament. And so, yeah, I totally believe in that birds can be, you can have one's more flighty and have a different temperament than others for sure.
Okay. On a side note to that, if you are in a neighborhood that allows them, let's say you're on a 1-acre lot or a half-acre lot, what would be some good varieties of chickens that are known to be quiet?
Yeah. Well, all those breeds that I mentioned, the Rhode Island Red and New Hampshire, the Summer, Sussex, Orpingtons, they're all kind of the heavier breed. They all have nice temperament. They're not as noisy or squawky as like a white leghorn or that kind of breed would be. And so I think those breeds are all great for backyard flock.
Okay.
The sex links, they're great too. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, is avian influenza transmissible to dogs or any other animal outside of birds?
Well, great question. Before this year, I would have said no, but this particular strain of avian flu, they've found it in mammals in odd scenarios, and I'm not saying that it's infecting them or killing them, but and how they've contracted it, but they have the federal government has and their testing programs, they have found a virus in this particular virus strain in mammals this year. And so I'm certainly not going to say that that it's going to start killing dogs and cats and whatnot, because it's not, but it's just odd that they have found it on some occasions.
So similar in that, like with COVID, that they found some cats and dogs had it, but weren't,
That's right.
didn't have any symptoms. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Great comparison there. Yeah.
Okay. And then I already answered that one. Will the slides be available? So reach out to me. I'll have that and I'll send that off to those folks that are interested. Someone said we need more time. So unfortunately, we can't do that. Let's see. I've got one that says bait down. Not sure what that's in reference to.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was the slide where I'm showing where I said clean up and bait down,
Okay.
meaning that clean up around, this is pest control, clean up around, and then use baits, poisons essentially. If you do have a rat and mouse problem, putting bait down will take care of them.
So on that note, I know since some chickens like to eat mice, what are their concerns about doing that?
Go.
Specifically, would you recommend that, or would you recommend that bucket contraption where they basically crawl up to the top and then fall in? I've seen a lot of people say this is like a miracle for getting rid of mice and rats.
Yeah, well, that's always going to be a concern for sure. You don't want a chicken eating a rodent that's consumed poison. So, there are a lot of other options, trapping and glue boards, and it kind of just depends on, how big of a problem that you might have. But yeah, there are a lot of bells and whistles out there that work. It doesn't always have to be a poison bait.
Okay. So I think we talked about mixing ages. How can you avoid mixing ages? So obviously hens kind of age out. So people are a lot of times adding new chicks every year. how do you integrate I think it probably boils down. How do you integrate the different ages? What's the best method to do that?
Yeah. Well, probably the best way is making sure that wherever you get your birds from, that you get them from a source that's involved with the National Poultry Improvement Program. So they come from a hatchery where they're doing vaccinations. Their breeding program, their breeding program is incorporated some of these prevention practices. And if you always get birds from those sources, then it reduces the risk of, the old birds passing something on to younger birds. Certainly if your birds get sick, particularly with a viral disease, and they survive, and then you get new chicks and bring them in, the likelihood is that they're going to contract it, because the old birds will continue to shed virus for quite some time, even though they've recovered from it. So you just got to be careful. Classic story that I use a lot is, I had a fellow call me. He was running a flock of about 400 brown egg layers, and when he called me, he was losing about 20 a day. They were dying on him, and he was just couldn't figure out what happened. And come to find out, he went to a flea market, and he said there were the two prettiest pullets he'd ever seen. He just had to buy them. And so he bought them, he quarantined them, and then he put them in his flock. And that's when his birds got sick and started dying. So those little pullets had survived a disease that his flock had not been exposed to. Even though he went through a quarantine, they were shedding that virus when he put them into the flock. And so you just have to be, whenever you combine flocks or bring in new birds, it's always going to be a risk, but depending on your source, you can kind of reduce that risk.
Would you recommend, if you get them from a hatchery, they're going to be probably vaccinated against Merrick's at least. Do you recommend mixing flocks with, say, some backyard bred birds and hatchery birds that are vaccinated, or is that a bad idea? Should you stick with one or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because oftentimes even vaccines, depending on what kind of vaccine and what it was trying to prevent, sometimes those vaccines can be live virus. And so that means then that the birds will then shed live vaccine virus that can be picked up by birds, and then they can develop symptoms and signs of disease. And so, gosh, it's always a challenge. I know that, you can't always do a one and done. You can't always just bring in 5 chickens and then when they're done, they're gone, and you bring in 5 more. But that's really the only way to say you're not going to spread it from one group to the other. But yeah,
Hard to do in a backyard flock.
hard to do in a backyard flock. Yeah. So
Okay. All right. Moving on, just a real easy one. What is grit?
Grit is chicken teeth. Chickens, of course, don't have teeth, right? They're a bird. And so the gizzard is the muscle that grinds up their food to particle size that they can absorb. And grit is like little bits of rock, like pea gravel and things like they may pick up, that goes into their crop and stays in their crop and helps assist that crop to grind up the food. And so all it is, grit is a way to help the birds better utilize the feed that they've consumed. Yeah.
Good answer. Good answer. Easy. Let's see. I've heard discussion around feeding chickens eggshells. Good or no good? Plus, Earlier you listed some brown egg layers. Any suggestions for white egg layers?
Okay. Well, calcium is calcium. Calcium of the eggshell, or calcium from oyster shells, or calcium from limestone. Calcium. It's just kind of the source that's in. Now, I wouldn't want my chickens to recognize that it's an egg shell. You don't want them to start eating eggs, because that's a habit that's hard to break. But if you want to use eggshells, you can certainly grind them up or smash them up and not make them recognizable as an eggshell. And then that can be part of your calcium or your oyster shell blend that you might want to give to the birds as an extra calcium source. White egg layers. Of course, the white leghorn is the classic standard. That's the bird that the industry uses because they lay a lot of eggs. They're a smaller bird. They don't take as much feed. And so they're a great egg layer. Any of the Mediterranean breeds, which again, they're going to have that white earlobe, they're going to lay a white egg. And so, some of those things like the buttercups and that might have some of that Mediterranean heritage in them, they're going to lay a lot of white eggs.
Okay.
But the leghorn's the standard.
Sorry. Probably one of the easier ones to source too, unless you're going to order from a hatchery.
That's right.
Okay. Do you have any more ideas on predator proofing coops and runs, especially against foxes and raccoons?
Yeah. Certainly coverage, because they can climb, right? So, yeah, I mean, you could have a 10-foot fence and they're going to get over it. So, making sure that they can't get over, or, I think in one of the pictures showed an example of almost like, it's not that you want razor wire, but you have, if you have wire on your coop, you're going to want it angled outwards so that when they climb up it, then they can't quite get through it and get around and over. But good sturdy wire, really, and all the way around and over the top should keep them out, as well as that kind of like that apron to keep them from digging underneath as well.
So I know some new chicken owners who are making coops. I know there's some will probably educate them, but chicken wire versus hardware cloth.
Yeah. Well, hardware cloth is more sturdy, of course, and typically has smaller openings, so it's going to keep out birds and mice and probably snakes and those other things that could go through chicken wire. So it'll help keep some of those other pests and predators out. Hardware cloth will, compared to just regular old chicken wire.
Okay. So let's say you do have a sick bird and you maybe suspect avian flu, maybe you suspect it's something else. How are chickens supposed to be disposed of if they're infected? Do you always want to reach out to have that bird tested, or how is the best way to dispose of them?
Yeah, chickens, they're going to die. They're susceptible to bronchitis and the flu, just like we are, and their lifespan is 7-8 years maybe, but they're gonna die, and it's not uncommon for also hens to have internal problems with reproductive system and other things that can cause them to die. And so it's unless we know for sure it's avian flu, if there's concern about it, certainly we can, I'd recommend they call you, and then you can help them through that triage sheet. And then if it looks heavy on the end of a AI kind of suspect, then we go through the lab. But just disposing of a bird is simply as wrapping it up in a plastic bag and putting it in the trash can is really all we need to do to be effective in a small flock.
Okay. Are there any additional supplements that are good for laying hens, such as additional calcium, particular vitamins, kelp, that kind of stuff? Or I'll just add in, is it just a complete layer feed that you're getting at the store that's pre-mixed? Is that good enough?
Yeah, I always recommend a complete feed from a supplier that's, there. The feed has been designed for the bird as it needs it, and it's going to have all those required nutrients at the level it needs. And so anything else that you give to it, whether it be scratch feed or fermented grains, or even some kitchen scraps on occasion, that's just dessert, really. So I really don't want anybody trying to formulate their own feed using kelp and chicken scratch and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because in the end you'll be missing some vital things that they need. So a complete feed is number one, and then you can supplement as you feel like you would like to after that.
So an interesting one, how long do chickens typically live? And I'll add to that, based on a productivity level, let's just say it's an average, like a Leghorn or a Rhode Island Red or something like that. What could you expect to see that first year of laying? How many eggs over the course of a week? And then going forward, when do they basically stop laying? When does it, get down to so few in eggs that you may want to consider culling or putting them out to a retirement farm?
Right. Yeah. So a white leghorn, for example, they're going to lay about 250 plus eggs a year. And this is assuming that you keep them on a minimum of 14 hours of light every day, all year long. You can expect about 250 eggs from a white leghorn. But the older they get, of course, the fewer eggs they're going to lay. And what our industry does, just as an example, a typical lay cycle would be up to like 65 weeks of age. So they've gone through a year of egg production, and then they're either molted. They do take them through a molt that regenerates the reproductive system, and then they can get another egg laying cycle out of them. But depending on the price of feed and everything else, they may only keep them for a year, because then the cost ratio comes into play. From a backyard flock scenario, it's still the same way. They're going to lay, if you have a leghorn, she's going to lay, let's just say she's laid 250 eggs that first year. Well, the second year, she may only lay 100, 220 eggs. And the third year, it might be down to 150 or less. The older they get, the fewer eggs they're going to lay, and the poorer quality those eggs are going to be. And so it will come to the point where somebody has to make a decision. Okay, what do we do? Are they a member of family now, and we just let them live out their days, or what do we do? But every year there's going to be fewer and fewer eggs, but you're still feeding her probably the same amount. So
Yeah. Basically, it boils down to, did you name them or did you not name them?
that's right.
This one says, why are bantams so mean?
That's in their nature. That's their genetic makeup, their physiology. They're they haven't really been bred for any kind of commercial purposes. So and temperament, believe it or not, it's one things that you can kind of breed for, but there's no commercial value for it, so nobody spent the time or money to breed the meanness out of a bantam.
Sounds about right. Sounds about right. Okay, well, that was basically, I think that was the last question. We had the whole chicken and the egg thing, but we don't have to answer that. So I'm going to put my email. Somebody else asked is feed required if you're free ranging?
Well, I answered that the first slide, didn't I?
Yeah.
I mean, they can survive, but do you want them to thrive? Really, that's what, do you want them to be as productive as they can be, or as efficient as they can be, or do you want them to scavenge and then you get what you get? So it's really it's a difference between surviving and thriving, and then you're in between. You're the beneficiary of whatever you might get in between there. So that's really the answer to that one.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it. All right. Well, I think that's all we've got. We're about at 7:30. So last chance for anybody that has a last question to ask. Otherwise, I put my email in the chat box. And so if you wanted a copy of the slides, or you want to know where to find the recording, feel free to hit me up for that, and I will get that information to you. But thank you so much, Dr. Ritz. That was awesome.
Absolutely.
Lots of good information, and hopefully everybody learned a little something tonight and left a little bit more knowledgeable about chickens. And that's basically it. So if anybody else has any other questions, otherwise, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming out, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.